Just,
Speakers in here, it's just gonna be.
okay. Just for you, okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. This is our final commission meeting prior to sending our recommendations to City Council for consideration. I want to thank each of you for your time, for your knowledge, for your expertise, for your inquisitiveness, your questions, your asks for clarity as we move forward with the what we were asked to do by both City Council and other elected officials in looking at the charter and making recommendations that potentially can be on the November ballot. So I want to open it up for other commission members if they would like to give us their thoughts as far as how this process has gone, or just comments that they'd like to make. So commission members, if you have any comments you'd like to make prior to us getting started today, I would welcome those.
So when I first found out that I'd been appointed to this commission, I called him up and asked him, said, "Are you sure?" When I came in the room, I recognized that I was the only person in the room that didn't have a title. You know? So just being the every guy that's out here. It has enhanced my opinion of the city of Columbus. I love Columbus. I do love Columbus. And I tell people all the time, Columbus really works. I can remember when my dad was living and he lived in D.C., and when he came here, he would say, "The streets are clean." Right, you know. I've been particularly impressed with the process, how information has been provided to us. At times I would have liked to have known what an alternative was, but I felt like it was always in good faith and always in the sense that we want government to work more efficiently and more effectively, and so this is why we're asking for this particular change. And then lastly, thank you, John. Thank you. I mean, made it easy to actually do this, and so I walk away with an enhanced favorable opinion of the city, and as one of the ambassadors that are out there, I just thank you. It's been really a pleasure to be a part of this.
Any other comments? Okay, hearing none. Could I get adoption of the minutes from June 2022 meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Against, same sign? Okay, the minutes pass. Okay, old business. Consideration of public feedback on charter. I am going to change that because I think it's best for us to look at the recommendations according to the points, according to the issues, and make it in consideration with the issues as we move forward. So I am going to take a point of privilege and change the agenda in that what we will do is go through each of the issues that we were asked to consider. If we've made a recommendation, if there were points that came from the public, that we should hear those from John. And then from there, if there are any amendments to that recommendation that we have done prior, then we amend that recommendation to include new points. Okay. So I know, John, that'll probably change up your presentation, but it might not, because we're going to start with the charter review recommendations. So if we can go ahead and get started. And again, what the issue is, if we had approved a recommendation, what the points were from the public, if there are any points of amendment, and then amend that particular recommendation to include those points.
Thank you, Chair Bartley. So up on the screens here, sorry, the big drawdowns presentation screen doesn't work, but this is just to have it in front of you. Obviously, this is what we had discussed and voted on, in some cases a couple times already. So in no particular order, I took some of the recommendations down and left blanks where we may not have had action on any yet. We'll probably spend a bit of time on this first one, considering it involves the initiative petition process. So the first recommendation that we were looking at was self-dealing reforms in the initiative process. As that stands now, there were two motions on this. This recommendation adding new sections to the charter to address initiated petition process as pertains to self-dealing measures such as monopolies, oligopolies, and cartels, and increasing transparency and accountability. So with this, there were two, like I said, two votes on motions. The first motion was to accept the recommendation for consideration in final recommendations. The second was to amend this recommendation, which originally contained a requirement for a certain number of signatures for not only petitions deemed to be in violation of a potential new ban on those self-dealing measures, but also for any initiated ordinance, charter amendment, referendum, or recall. The signature requirements would have been out of 5 of 9 new districts. Following public feedback and consideration from residents, from stakeholders, and discussions amongst commissioners, the motion was taken to exclude the signature requirement from consideration in the final recommendations. We were approached a few times at the 2 public comment hearings that we held with some common requests for consideration. I've distilled those into these in speaking with Chair Bartley. So the first was a request to remove the 1-year time limit regarding filing petitions for initiated ordinance or charter amendment. The second would be granting an additional time to remedy a signature deficit should petitions be found insufficient due to low number of signatures, specifically allowing for 10 additional days for signature curing, as they would refer to it, following insufficiency, similar to the process for state initiatives. And then the third, to suggest to limit the time that the city attorney would have to determine if a petition meets single subject form requirements and presumably a review of whether or not it would violate this potential ban on self-dealing measures that would go into effect with should the first portion meet the ballot. So for that, I would open it back up to Chair Bartley for discussion amongst commissioners about the proposals received from public feedback.
Thank you. Is there any discussion around, let's say, the recommendation number 1 that we have recommended to change as far as allowing the 10 days in the curing period?
Ask us a quick
Yes.
question. So we've already approved the anti-monopolistic, so that's
Right.
been forwarded. So we're just discussing the 3 he just
Right.
mentioned. Okay, thanks.
Right. That's
I'll make a comment, if it's okay, Chair, on the the time limit, the 10-day cure, and the process for the city attorney to review. I would just like to hear some feedback from the city attorney's office on those recommendations, just not being in the middle of sort of the, logistics of that. I think it'd be helpful for me to hear their perspective on these issues.
Thank you. I have had a chance to speak with the city attorney as well, so I'm here representing the thoughts of the office. The one we have the most concern about is, of course, the city attorney 10-day time limitation recommendation. The reason that we have that concern is a couple-fold. First of all, under the current charter provisions, it's clear that the city attorney review is not designed to assure the petition commission, or committee, that they are able to then go forward and collect signatures. The specific requirement under the charter is that the city attorney review it for purposes of advising their clients, counsel, and the city clerk. We need to have an opportunity to do the legal research that is necessary in order to do that, and sometimes that simply cannot occur within a 10-day period of time. When you take a look at the other provisions in other cities and under state law, you'll see that while there are time frames in some of those different provisions, what the work that is being done by the city attorneys in those cities and the state are different than the work that the city attorney is doing here. So first of all, we talk about the state. At the state level, the Attorney General reviews not the entirety of the petition itself. They only review the summary to determine whether or not it's fair or accurate, and they do that in 10 days. Then there's a subsequent review by the Board of Elections, also a 10-day time frame to review only whether or not it's single subject. So each of those entities have 10 days to perform a smaller function than the city attorney is being asked to perform under the city charter. Furthermore, at the state level, the performance of those tasks is a condition precedent to the petition moving forward. So there very much is a time delay for individuals who are seeking signatures. They cannot go out and start seeking signatures until those two things have occurred. Under the city charter, while it certainly might be prudent for a petition committee to hear what the advice of the city attorney might be, it is not a legal barrier to them going out and getting signatures at the time that they submit their initial petition for pre-circulation review. The second thing that I would comment upon is if you take a look at the comparable cities that have been provided by Mr. Oswald. Thank you for doing the research late last night to get all those together. The other cities in the state of Ohio that have provisions that discuss review of initiative petitions, we are unique in that we are the only one of the ones that were provided. So that's Cleveland, Dayton, Toledo, Akron, Youngstown, and Cincinnati, so the other major urban areas in the state of Ohio. We are the only one where the city attorney does provide a pre-circulation review. In every other one of these circumstances, initiative petitions go out, they put their petition together, they collect their signatures, and it's filed with all of the signatures at that same time, and there's not a review that happens until much later in the game. So actually, the City of Columbus is providing an opportunity for the petitioners to already hear well ahead of time what the legal advice might be of the city attorney, but it is not a condition precedent for them to go out and collect signatures. In terms of just the dates and the time itself, the 10-day time frame and why that might be of issue or concern, the recent fair housing petitions kind of sheds a little light onto why that might be an issue. At current, working with the city attorney, are reviewing the 5th of 5 petitions that have been filed for the fair housing petition. They are each over 40 pages in length. They are substantial in terms of the number of issues that they are addressing. While our review is limited to reviews as to form and as to single subject, we certainly have to go through and read them all and determine whether or not there is a single subject within those 40 pages. One of the petitions that was submitted, shortly after it was submitted, the city attorney's office was contacted by 2 members of the petition committee indicating that they had not approved the second amended petition that was subsequently filed, which still contained their names. We had to, at that point in time, do some legal research into what the effect of that might be on the validity of the petition. That took some time. because once again, under the city charter, the purpose for the city attorney review is to advise its clients, the city council and the city clerk, regarding the sufficiency. And we need time to do that and conduct that legal review. Now that we're adding the monopoly aspect and we're adding the self-dealing aspect, that of course will also require some legal review that should not be rushed. So for all of those reasons, the city attorney's office does have a concern about putting a 10-day timeline, and in fact, putting a timeline at all on their review of legality for their clients. As to the other two recommendations, the city attorney does not have any objection or any opinion one way or the other on the 10-day cure or 15-day cure period. Again, that's an administrative function. That's not a very long period of time. We do have some concerns about opening up the 1 year to grab the signatures. The reason being, again, looking at the fair housing petition, when you have multiple iterations of petitions that are being filed on the same subject, and they're all circulating over an extended period of time, there is opportunities there for confusion. There's opportunities there for individuals who are signing not to know exactly which one they are signing. And the longer period of time that you have that open, the greater that opportunity and those concerns are raised. The other thing that I would point out in terms of the extended period of time, those issues, it makes it much more difficult for the city to then track the pre-circulation to the subsequent petition being filed. So as I explained for the other urban areas, they are submitting them with the signatures already. We are trying to marry up pre-circulation petitions with what is subsequently filed. So there's an administrative component to that, and we have multiple petition committees over the last number of years that submit multiple petitions. And so we do need to make sure that they are in alignment and that what is being submitted is what had previously been reviewed in the pre-circulation petition. So there's an administrative component there that is eased by having a cap on how long the signature time could go out. So those are the considerations that the city attorney's office would like the commission to consider.
Are there any questions for Laura?
So in summary, you would like not to have, to remove the 1 year portion of that?
Correct.
Okay. And then it doesn't matter about the 10-day, and to extend that period to review to a longer period of time?
Correct. We don't have an objection to that.
Okay.
Just a quick follow-up. So in the 10-day cure period, which I understood you to say the city attorney's office didn't have a major objection to, that is consistent with the state's process for allowing petition circulators to remedy, it sort of remedies signatures where there's some questions. Is that kind of what the 10-day cure period does?
Yes, so at the state level, the 10-day window for additional signature collection applies following the submission if found to be insufficient in terms of the number of signatures that have been gained. So it's important to note it wouldn't be curing anything related to the petition itself. It would just be curing whether or not there were a sufficient number of signatures. You can, over a period of time, of course, have individuals
Okay.
who, when they lawfully signed it at the first time,
Yeah.
then they moved.
Yeah.
And that would give the petition committee the idea that, okay, we need X number of signatures more that are lawful. It seems like that, again, we don't have an opinion one way or the other. We certainly don't object, and it is what they do at the state level.
Okay.
There is, however, a timeline. I mean, the election is actually the deadline, and then do you work back from there when you said there's a period of time when you can actually start to collect signatures?
So from, going back to the charter, our current requirement? Right. So under the current scheme within the city charter, once you file, you have 1 year to collect the signatures. The idea behind this cure period would be that once you submit, and be it that on the year deadline or 90 days earlier, if you think you got it done, you would have X number of days afterwards, once you hear back from the Board of Elections regarding whether or not you have a sufficient number of signatures to then collect additional. So it would extend it for that period of time. But it would basically depend, as I understand the recommendation, it would extend it from the point in time when the Board of Elections returns with their determination as to whether or not there's a sufficient number of signatures.
Okay.
So, I have a question. Particularly around extending the petition timeframe for collection. You said that there are administrative issues, but if the time clock starts and then 2 years later you turn something in, the administrative is no more than it was before because they didn't turn anything earlier. So you start looking at that, and then from there, if there is any deficit in the number, then there is that cure period where they could go and, because of, let's say, someone has moved and so forth, that they could go and collect. So I'm failing to see what the administrative issue is.
No, I understand. The issue would be, yes, as to any one given petition, the process would be the same. There'd just be a longer period of time between the intervals. But because we get so many multiple filed petitions, in terms of if everybody has 2 years instead of one, you're stacking more and more of them into that period of time. So as I said, we are on our fifth fair housing petition right now, just filed within the last 3 months. And we had an innumerable number of clean energy petitions that were filed sequentially over time. So it's not, and again, the commission's certainly willing opportunity to take a look at this particular issue. I'm just expressing from the concern that we do see multiple petitions. They all look very similar to one another, filed by the same group, that would have to be managed over a longer period of time, from the clerk of court, or city clerk's perspective.
And so then what would be your recommendation? If it's going to, your concern is that you wouldn't have time to review all of those petitions, is that correct?
Not the review necessarily from the city attorney's perspective, but the overall administration of it from the city clerk's perspective.
So for me, that seems very bureaucratic and not necessarily something that if there are citizens and groups that want to file petitions, that's their right. And I don't think that they should be hindered because of a time frame. And I'm just looking at city budgets. Then if you see that you are getting more petitions, then is there an opportunity to add FTEs in order to be able to review from a legal standpoint? I mean, I could see if there were legal issues, but it seems to be administrative issues are the things that are hindering moving forward or adding additional time frame because of the amount of petitions that you're receiving. And many times in other businesses, because of that particular issue, you hire additional folks in order to deal with that increase. Or, let's say, provisional, which I know that you don't like that word, but in order. So that's my sticking point right now, that it just sounds bureaucratic.
Yeah, my view on it is I would be open to maybe extending the time frame, but I don't like keeping it unlimited as this change, the changes that were requested to us suggest, which is just to strike the 1 year, thus leaving it open so you could do it for any number of years. I'd be open to, narrowing the window of time, or striking this, but maybe extending it to 2 years. I could see that being a reasonable compromise. But I think if you go into 3, 5, years, you've got the sort of the logistical challenge from the city's perspective. It's probably not all that advantageous for the signature collectors, given that there's going to be turnover and signatures will drop off. And then I just think as a citizen, it's also like if I signed something 4 years ago, it's not even made it to the ballot yet. It may be a very different. I don't know. That feels funky to me to to have something sort of circulated out there in the space for, an extended period of time, and then all of a sudden it gets placed on the ballot, after the fact. That's just my personal opinion.
Thank you. Any other comments? I am in agreement with Carrie that I believe that there should be a time frame or a limit to the extension from 1 year to 2 years. And that's what I would like to recommend as far as change that language, not to just strike it out, but to add the additional 1 year to get it to 2 years, due to the fact we heard about extenuating circumstances that happened due to the pandemic. And they were not able to extend the time frame. This hopefully would give the opportunity to be able to collect additional signatures. And then after that, with adding the 10-day cure time frame, that could assist in helping to remedy. So that's what I'm putting forward right now for consideration by the commission members for comment.
So how would that language then read?
I look at John.
Well, for the first one, it's probably just as simple as changing from 1 year to 2 years. Right, that's pretty straightforward.
Yes, that'd be correct. And then likely for the second, if we're to recommend language for a 10-day additional window, it would likely get a little bit more complicated. The mention in charter could just be a simple sentence. A sample language piece could state if the signatures are determined to be insufficient, or if the number of signatures are determined to be insufficient, 10 additional days shall be allowed for the filing of additional signatures to such petition. There may have to be some administrative rules around that, as there are at the state, of exactly when that date is triggered. And to some extent, that's determined by the Secretary of State's office and their action at the state level. They are the ones that dictate when folks are allowed to start collecting those additional signatures, and it gives them additional time to count.
What is it supposed to read?
Is there any other comments or questions by commission members prior to us moving forward?
Are we then going to vote on this to actually be a change? Okay.
But I don't want to do so until we have all of the comments in question captured or discussed.
And I will add, Chair Bartley, that a recommendation or an amendment to this, a recommendation to allow for these additional provisions would not have to come with or be submitted to council with specific charter language. It could be crafted later. So your recommendation is not dictated upon having
The actual
something like that
language.
ready to go, but just the recommendation that there be an additional 10 days to collect
Okay.
signatures.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, I make a motion to amend recommendation number 1, which is self-dealing reform and initiative process, to include a 10-day cure period that aligns with the state of Ohio, as well as increasing the petition time frame of collection of signature from 1 year to 2 years.
Second.
Do I have a second? You had, I said, do I have a motion?
I'll based on that. And then hope someone seconds it. I made the motion.
Okay, I second.
All in favor? Opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Okay. Recommendation 1 is amended. Recommendation number 2, open meetings. John?
Certainly. So with recommendation number 2, this was the discussion around open meetings and specifically the ability to go, the ability to have virtual participation to allow public bodies of the city to conduct business in a virtual format should become necessary. There were two recommendations submitted, 2 proposals to this commission upon their request. The first of these would have replaced language in the charter about calling meeting, conducting the meeting, calling a special meeting, rather than according to the general laws of the state, as replaced by according to ordinance of council. And it would have been left to council ordinance to set up the structure for how open meetings would be conducted by the public bodies in the city, allowing for them to be held virtually by ordinance of council, and then set up the structure by which that would take place. The second proposal was more limited in scope and made the allowance for virtual meetings explicitly in the charter itself, and saying that by ordinance of council, but the charter would follow the general laws of the state, except for the case of the conduction of business by public bodies in open meetings be held virtually. Rules to be set by, rules and circumstance by which that would happen to be set by ordinance of council. The commission took up the second proposal and approved of it to be considered for final recommendations.
Are there any comments or questions?
By commission members regarding the open meeting recommendation? Okay. Then we will go with the recommendation that we approved. The next, civil service.
All right, so civil service updates, and we have Director DeLong here should any questions or concerns need to be addressed. There were several updates mentioned for modernization of civil service, as well as bring us in line with the ORC, the Ohio Revised Code. One of the largest of these being the concept of banding, and changing language in there to allow for to change the allowance of no fewer than 3 bands to no more than 3 bands, was the central change there. Several other edits as well, including section 158, which would be repealed and replaced. That was the residency requirements, as have been declared unconstitutional in our charter. We have not yet made a motion on these, though we've heard two-piece presentation from Director DeLong and had discussion on those. We just had not made the motion yet. So, Chair Bartley, for any further discussion or consideration or motion.
If Director DeLong would just give us just an overview of what her recommendations are in a very succinct manner.
Would you like me to be that succinct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. We're going to start off with 148-1B. It's looking at classifications. It was just basically clarifying unclassified positions to the mayor's office. I'll talk a little bit about that because I've had lots of questions about that, and other than that, haven't had very many questions. That specific one, if I can get to it really quickly. We changed the language from executive assistants and administrative assistants to the mayor to executive staff and all other staff of the office of the mayor, unless otherwise stated in this section. And the reason we really need to change that is when we post those positions, we are getting more clerical staff than professional staff that apply for those positions for the mayor's office. And that was the underlining reasoning behind that. The change to the banding, do you want me to address that one a little bit? We talked about that at several meetings, contrary to what you've read in the dispatch about it not being competitive. It will still be competitive. We will still test all 250-plus classifications, including police and fire. And anyone who passes the test or who does not pass the test will not be put on the eligible list and will not be considered for hiring. The same thing happens today. And I can tell you from elected officials who have asked for people to be tested through our Rule 6 testing outside of the process, if they've not passed the test, they are not hired in the city, which makes me not necessarily a popular person, but makes sure that I'm doing my job, which is in line with the charter. And I think that's why I've been here for 11 years. Outside of that, we did look at that across the cities of Akron, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Dayton, Toledo, and Youngstown, as well as our local cities, Dublin, Grove City, and Westerville. What I defined last time is only 3 of the 9 have that information in their charter. The rest of it is defined in rules only. Ours is going to be not only in the charter that says that we have to have at least one, meaning that we'll have at least a single list, or we'll have 3 different bands depending on what we determine those rules to be. And right now, with the economy the way it is and the small amount of people who are coming in to test, it really makes no sense to have 3 bands if you only have 30 people and only 2/3 of those people are that pass the test, right? Because usually 1/3 of the people do not pass the test who take the test. So then you have 20 people to select, and they might be selecting 5 people. And if you only have, if you're breaking that down and you have 3 people in your 90 band and 20, say we have 8 people you're going to use 2 bands anyway, so only the bottom 3 people would not be looked at currently. And sometimes it's a decimal point between who's in the 80 band and who's in the 70 band. So I think it's important that we're looking at being ahead of the game instead of being behind what other cities are doing. And frankly, like I said, many of the people get by with saying they're testing, but hiring people, like in the state, provisionally. And once 2 years are over, they automatically become permanent and they don't even have to take a test. Here at the city, since I've been here, that has never happened one time. Every person who's been hired provisionally has had to take a test within that 2-year period to show that they are competitively with the other group of people that have been on that list. Outside of that, that's what we're hoping to do, especially when we're in an economy now where it's an employee market instead of an employer market in terms of hiring. Outside of that, 149F, we go to 149B, which is where we are making our language plural when we use the word skills and abilities. I said in 2 places I worded it differently. That's in one of those cases where it's going to be knowledge, skills, and abilities. We're accurately defining our test notice that's going to be on our website on 149C, on 149E. There was modernization of language. Let me see that one. Oh, again, that one talked about age, sex, and physical conditions, which we do not select people based on those. So that's just very modern, actually getting us, having our language legal and not illegal. 149G is changing the word temp to provisional because provisional is the definition that's there and how we define it. 149GH, I should have worn my glasses today. Is just a clarification of non-competitive appointments, and we left in the definition instead of taking it out where we initially talked about that. I had some comments about how do you define what that is, and both talked to the city attorney and just in general, and I think even though it's confusing, it's probably more confusing not having some kind of definition in there. Outside of that, the 149J is again, knowledge, skills, and abilities, making sure they're the same in both places. In 149N, we're just deleting obsolete language. In 149O, we're rewording the probationary rules to make it more clear in how we're operating currently. We have some MOUs and so forth that are behind all of our contracts and in line with our contracts. We're just making the charter in line that we're operating across the board, so it's in one place and not in many places, hopefully in the future. In our appeals, right now, it says that we need to actually have the appeal, get the appeal, and hear the appeal in 10 days. I can't get schedules for attorneys and witnesses in 10 days. It seems impossible to do that. If we can do it, we're going to do it as quickly as someone wants to do it, but most generally, it's actually the appellant who holds us up and trying to get their attorney and getting the information with them. Make sure I know what this is. I feel like I've talked about this so much that I should know. 151 is really just clarification and modernization. It says that we give addresses out of people's names on our certification list. We do not. We give to the appointing authority only the names and not the addresses of those individuals for lots of reasons, as you can imagine. And again, this is just clearing up some language. If we change the banding to no more than 3 bands, it gets rid of some of the language in there that addresses if we're currently using 3 or more bands. And 152. 152, we're just getting rid of language that looks like it was written when the charter was written and really has no bearing on what we're currently doing now or have done in many, many, many years. And last but not least, the residency, which I think, unless you want me to go over that again, it's just putting us in line with, the Ohio Supreme Court has said that what we're currently doing is illegal. I mean, they've readapted, and so we want to be in line with the state. And so we've written it so that if we choose to at some point have a rule for residency, that we can do that, and we'll have to go through ordinance, through council to do that. And most generally in line,
Are there extenuating circumstances that you would invoke residency?
the Supreme Court, and Laura's probably better apt at this to address it, but I think it's basically in line with in safety forces. If there is some need for our safety forces to be closer, meaning have a residency required so that they can react to emergencies quicker or so forth. We have not chosen to do that at this point.
This might be a question for John or Laura, but if we were to adopt all these and council were to adopt all these, would all of this be on the ballot? I mean, essentially all these specific changes which are outlined here in this presentation?
I can let John speak as to what form it would look like. Yes, the voters would be able to see all of the specific iterations and how it would change the existing charter.
So, that's good. The drawback, I think, is that you have an incredibly lengthy ballot
It could be.
measure, which could, I wonder, drown out some of the other things that we're doing with the anti-monopolistic language and other things. And so, my question is, are there priority changes here that you would say, we need this, these two things are critically important, these other things might just be some updates. And I just wonder if we, as a commission, should think about making a note of that to council. I'm sure they can, make their own deductions about, the final process here, but it might be good to just note, if we can, some priority issues, since there's a lot.
There's a lot. Been waiting a long time, you see.
I can tell.
With its position on the ballot, do you think that would affect passage of these individual items? I mean, if the most important things were first?
Frankly, I've operated under these rules for a very long time, and we make them work, right? We know that we're not going to do anything illegal. Are there ones that scare me more than others, that if they come back? Yes. There's ones that I think that would make hiring right now, where it's very difficult to hire, a little bit easier, and so forth. And that would be right now for the mayor's office to have their clarification to their staffing, which will affect another area that you've, I think, already approved. So that would be the first one, that 148-1B. Because it defines the executive staff there, which is defined for a reason there in the, so 141B, for me, in terms of the banding, I think that's critically important for the future of how we do things. Like I said, it's not going to affect everything. I don't necessarily think it'll affect police and fire at all. I think that's probably going to be 3 bands. Right now, we're hiring, we just tested police in February, and every single person off that list will be, it'll be gone by September. We're actually hiring again, we're actually testing again for December. So I think we're going to go through the whole band anyway for for police twice. So we're going to do 2 complete tests this year for them, partly because we haven't tested, since 2020, other than Rule 6 testing because of the pandemic and not being able to have the large groups in. So that one I think will be important. Probably if we wanted to say the one where it says that we base our hiring off of sex and age is probably something we should get out of there sooner versus later. And I will tell you what it is. I just saw it. Sorry. I'm going to go through and end up telling you all of them because I keep finding.
Well, maybe,
Yeah.
maybe we just make a note in the report about, I don't want to say concern, but just raise awareness about a 26-page ballot, if that's where we end up with this, and we can probably word it, a better way. I do worry about putting so much in front of the voter all at once that it just becomes.
I think the first 3 that you mentioned, I really would put banding first, because if that is a hiring issue that affects the entire city staffing component, for me, that would be number 1. Number 2 would be acting mayor, and number 3 would be your language that is illegal.
Yeah.
I have another question about, you mentioned that the current time, or a time frame for the appellant is not sufficient.
That
Do
would be
you-
that's what when I said, oh gosh, when I was trying to get down to it, that's probably a really important one too, the appeals process.
So what would you suggest as an appropriate time frame?
60 days, and that's to have the pre-hearing conference and then the appeal done within that time frame.
Since I'm having a hard time getting a plumber out, I could understand. Yeah. Okay, so 60 days, all right.
Yeah, and we can absolutely do it. I think if we had, from my staff, we could absolutely do it in that 30-day timeframe, but I will be having continuances all the time for getting attorneys and witnesses. And so I think it's better just to set a timeframe where I can reasonably get everybody here and not have to rework it again and again every time we have a continuance.
Okay.
The scheduling is the hardest part of that job, not the hearing itself.
Commissioner, if I may too, just as to the recommendation process for the commission itself. If there are additional considerations that you would want city council to take, say for instance, the commission would collectively want to highlight a few issues of civil service that they thought would be more key in light of perhaps this could be a larger or more confusing ballot issue should you choose to move forward. Those are thoughts you can include in the summary for the final recommendations to council specifically. As I know, for instance, on the open meetings, when we had that discussion, there was concern from individual commissioners and the commission as a whole, I think, about the circumstances by which virtual meetings would be allowed. Not that it would be something that you would recommend happen all the time, but in response to more special circumstances or emergencies. That would be that could be included in the recommendations in favor of that too when submitted to council. So thoughts and concerns that the commission has can definitely be shared with council. And I know in the past with these, though there have not been many, there was the very comprehensive look at the charter in 2014 when this process was kind of queued back up and triggered this commission this year and made it a decennial process that they ended up having. They split theirs up a lot more, I think. There ended up being 21, I think, official recommendations. There were a little more minutia. I think our recommendations are a little more collective as to topic than those were, but they ended up being split into only 3 different ballot issues, depending on what area of the city they touched. If it was like city functions as city administration, that's the heading it would put under. But there was a lot of amended language that was put in each of those. So it has happened. It can be done, though. If you would want to share to your concern with how that might be placed, and should council want to consider that these are what we think are the most important items with this, then that's definitely up to the commission.
I think they probably share your concern as well.
Okay, so. Could I get a motion to approve the civil service recommendations inclusive of recommending to council priorities for consideration given the lengthy amount of items?
My personal view on this is I would be comfortable recommending these as long as we put a note about sort of cautioning against overwhelming the voter with, an abundance of technical changes.
So I think that that's something we can discuss on the 12th. at the hearing when discussing this particular, approve them, but bring that up as a point of, for consideration when looking at if this is recommended to move forward on the ballot. Looking if there's an opportunity to reduce the number to those that are of priority for the city.
Yes, yes, Chair Bartley, there would be the opportunity to do that at the hearing or in the written submission of the recommendations to council that will be happening in the next few days.
Okay, let's do it within the recommendation, the written recommendations, and then reiterate it at the public hearing as well. Okay.
I have a question. Are we going to highlight within that section priority requests of the asks that are made or being made?
I would think in the written recommendation, yes.
So there's several priority
Right.
items that should be, okay.
But not-
Along with the rest of the,
Right.
okay. In determining the priority, would that come from the director or, okay. Thank you.
So, I don't think that we had mentioned that 60-day time frame. Is that something we'll add on when we, okay,
In the language, in the recommendations.
I got your back.
Got me? Either way, I would put it in the rules because I want a time frame which I can tell the attorneys, everybody, so that we're all clear, so.
Okay, then, so can I get a motion to approve the civil service recommendations?
So move.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposition, same sign. Any abstentions? Okay,
Thank you very, very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Acting mayor.
Thank you, Chair Bartley. Next recommendation for the acting mayor provisions that were presented to the commission. The proposal would introduce the concept of the mayor's cabinet into city charter, whereas previously it did not exist. There were only a few references to assistants, essentially, in charter, and the only directors that existed that exist currently in the charter are the directors of public service and public safety, and those were the options for those to be named as an acting mayor or mayor in case of temporary disability. The recommendation was to change the charter to include that, to include the mayor's cabinet and allow for greater flexibility in who could be selected as acting mayor, above and beyond the limitations of current language, as well as the recommendation included removing the council president from consideration for acting mayor, as there could be concerns, they expressed concerns of conflict of interest possibilities there. So that recommendation was taken up and a motion approved by the commission for consideration in the final recommendations.
Thank you. Since that time, we have received comment by Mr. Motel regarding consideration of the city council president being considered as acting mayor as well. I know we had that conversation amongst ourselves as well. And Mr. Motel, if you would like to speak for a couple of minutes as far as your rationale of why you believe this council president needs to be considered as given the opportunity.
Thank you. I didn't know I was given the opportunity to speak, but I appreciate it. No, again, I think it is a conflict of interest. I think that's two separate bodies of government we have here, the mayor's office and city council. And city council has their role, the mayor's office has their role. The president and/or, as I indicated, any member of city council, I don't think should be in such a position to replace the mayor. I guess I'd also like to know, how do you define a cabinet member? Who would that be? Directors or who else, like chief of staff? I'm not exactly sure how that definition is, but that's pretty much it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. It's our understanding from the information that we were presented is that it is the mayor's directors as well as his executive staff, which would be chief of staff and deputy chiefs of staff, would be for consideration as acting mayor. I'm sorry, it would be the directors, as well as chief of staff and deputy chiefs of staff. Yes. Go ahead.
So, if I understood the testimony, we're all in agreement that it shouldn't be
Right,
council president, right? Yeah, okay.
exactly.
Okay, got it.
Exactly. But I just wanted to give Mr.
Yeah,
Martell the
got
opportunity
it.
to speak. Okay, well, we will keep the recommendation as is and move on to city auditor and finances.
So just a quick overview of this. This was the first recommendation, actually, that the commission had taken up. It's largely modernization of language in charter sections and some technical language that had not been examined in a while, and provided the possibility of not only aligning the functions a bit more with the ORC, but also allowing for different forms of technology to be used in the functions of city finance and the auditor. The example I would pull out would be the provision dealing with warrants, specifically the form of which the recommendation would allow to be set by ordinance of council. So, for instance, if any other form of electronic technology would come up, we would have the flexibility to deal with that. A few of the other sections largely were replacing, striking some language, replacing ands with ors. And one particular other change of note was the change of the keeper of the oaths of elected office. As it stands now, the city auditor, for some reason in our charter, is the official keeper of oaths of office taken by elected officials, while the city clerk keeps all public records, and that is their charge, and is the charge of city clerks according to the Ohio Revised Code as well. So a change there would just remove the city auditor from that equation and put that with the city clerk. So that recommendation was taken up and approved for consideration in the final recommendation package by the commission.
Thank you, John. Any comments, questions by commission members of the city auditor and finance recommendations that we approved? Okay, hearing none. We've already discussed the initiated petition process
Yes.
when we discussed the first. And so our last piece is council structure and governance. We had both Mr. Motel as well as Mr. Beard, who came before us to discuss the council structure currently, as well as the Charter Review Commission that came up with award system. Are there any comments or conversation that we want to have regarding the information that we received and the testimony that we received from both Mr. Motel, Mr. Lyons, as well as Mr. Beard?
just Chair, I'll just reiterate what I said, previously, which is I think, the 2016 Charter Commission review put this new form of governance in place. We added 2 council members and created these council districts. I understand and hear the criticism of that recommendation. My view is that it is a change from what and how the city's governance structure has existed for many years, even if it's not a complete award system as proposed. I would say my recommendation would be to not take this up. The council, the district at-large council members haven't even sort of been reorganized. It hasn't really taken effect yet. My recommendation would be let's let it take effect based on what the voters overwhelmingly said when they approved this. And if in several years from now, the community and the residents want to consider further changes, then obviously they should. That'd be my recommendation, would be to not
Okay.
do anything on that.
Any other comments? I'm also going to interject. I believe that there were some very legitimate concerns that were raised by the community who came out to speak, particularly the 3 gentlemen I just mentioned. However, the voters voted on this, and they were presented with information. And we have, at this point in time, it has not been initiated, or the trigger has not been pulled. And so therefore, I think we need to give it the opportunity to actually run. And politics, elections are evolving and ever-changing. There is an opportunity in the future, but I cannot go against voters who voted for this and put something in the charter or recommend something that has not even been executed or implemented at this point in time. Again, understand the whole ward system and the at-large voting is an issue, but the voters voted for it. So I am not comfortable with bringing a motion to the commission to bring a recommendation to City Council for consideration for change of the governance structure and their council structure at this point in time. Any other comments? Okay, John. Administrative items now.
All right. So those are the recommendations. The next steps are going to be for me to make sure I capture in summaries that have already started to work up. I had shared around some of those based on your comments and viewpoints on recommendations already taken up. There were some amendment today to the initiative process comments, which I will reflect in the official recommendations as well. This will form kind of the executive summary, which I will complete this evening and share with commissioners. If all commissioners could do a pretty quick review. I know, we're coming up on it. It's technically not till Sunday, but I think everybody was in agreement that the 8th would be a good target since it's during the work week to have the recommendations in. So I will give that all to you for review this evening to look over to make sure that the comments accurately reflect. If there's any edits, please let me know. If you don't think it had reflected all of the conversation, or if there's additions you wanted to make, or anything you wanted to make council aware of along with the recommendations. And that document, once that has been reviewed and approved and edited or additions by you all, you will then be able to submit it to members of council via email, and that will represent your submission of final recommendations to council per charter. Following that, we will have the public hearing scheduled. This is for this coming Tuesday, July 12th, hosted by Council President Hardin, to take public comment on any action or lack of action that council should take on the recommendations. Following that, a little bit of a broken record here, but just to state what comes next, there will be a little less than a couple weeks for consideration for council if they would wish to submit any or all of these for the November ballot. In the normal course of business for council, the last meeting before August recess is July the 25th, and that's when the ordinances that would transfer these to the ballots would have to be passed. Following that, November 8th would be the general election. There's any other questions or comments, let me know, but that is what I had. Thank you very much.
Well, John, I just want to applaud you for all of your hard work, for your administrative work, for researching, for getting us the information that we requested. Laura, the same, as far as I know sometimes we were hard on you in the questions that we asked, and but really respect your knowledge as a city attorney, assistant city attorney, and you have assisted us through clarification, particularly when it came to state code and what's legal and so forth. So very appreciative of that as well. So I would like to really, thank both of you. Any other business, John?
Not at this time, Chair.
Okay, could I get a motion to adjourn?
Well, no, Chair Bartley, I want to say thank you for your leadership in keeping us on focus and on point. Thank you for that.
You're quite welcome. I like efficiency. But, this is all about democracy, and it's all about transparency and having those communications with amongst ourselves, with elected officials, and more importantly with the public. And so it's been a great learning experience for me, and I have enjoyed it. I am happy always when things end, when you have a tight time frame and there is an ending in sight. But it's been great to meet all of you. I have more new colleagues, and thank you.
We will meet with council we are actually going to meet with council.
It'll be the hearing on July 12th.
Yes.
We'll be presenting these recommendations to council, and then they will decide within the next 2 weeks if they'll look at the recommendations and decide if they will take them forward in whatever form to the ballot for the voters' consideration on November 8th.
Move for adjournment.
So moved. All in favor? Okay, I don't believe anyone's going to say no. So, again, thank you.